Recently, I spoke at an International Women's Day conference, and I was so excited to be invited there. I actually had this on my bucket list for a very long time to speak at a conference on International Women's Day. So I was so excited to be invited. And I got to say that the women there, and actually there was men there too, were really glad to hear the information. And also, we had a lot of conversation. So I'll be able to give you a little bit of insight based on what people in the room were thinking and saying. I, for International Women's Day this year, 2025, the theme was accelerated action. And I thought that was interesting because it's the focus on strategies and tools that drive women's progress, like to move us into action rather than just talking about it. In the end, what are we going to do? And so that was actually the hashtag was accelerated action. And in this conversation, it made me think a lot about women coming more from a place of power, of empowerment, and how we can tend to have times where we feel held back, like we're really literally our own worst enemies, and make things harder on ourselves and push ourselves down or allow others to push us down and to not really have that full empowered expression of who we are. International Women's Day this year was talked about it a lot and a focus on women's equality, women's achievements. And I think those are all well and good. And there are plenty of stories to be had about those. But I wanted to focus back on women and wellness and well being and mental health and mental wellness. Because when we focus on those inner strengths, on our inner selves, we actually lift ourselves up. And as we lift ourselves up, we lift up all women, but also all people. And this is where I came from in all the things I talked about. I want to dive a little deeper into some of these topics because I came up with three really key topics that were really common sticking points to women and where we kind of hold ourselves back. So let's talk about those. The first that we talked about for International Women's Day was women tend to be people pleasers. And we prioritize, the way I define that is women prioritize other people's needs over their own. And we have difficulty saying no and difficulty even acknowledging or recognizing our needs. There's another name for people pleasers, and that is codependence. And we've talked about that on the Feed Your Soul with Kim podcast quite a bit about codependence and how that shows up for women. So I'm going to talk about it really in the area this time of people pleasers. And why is it women tend to be people pleasers? First, we have a social conditioning. Women are socialized from a young age about deferring our needs, giving it over to other people. Let somebody else go first. Don't talk about what we want. And that's how we've been socialized. I'm not saying this as a bad thing. I'm just saying let's recognize what's been happening because then as we recognize it, acknowledge it, we then can have that accelerated action to do something different. Another reason why people or women tend to be people pleasers is that we really have this fear of rejection. There is something that happens when we are girls that we don't learn how to have play. What I learned in my college years is the idea that boys learn how to engage in sports. They learn how to lose. They learn how to not always be the best. And when you're on sport teams, you get used to that. There are winners and there are people that didn't win, the losers. Like and there's this feeling of rejection. And women don't often have that. We're more in cooperative kind of settings, and girls tend to have more of that cooperative kind of play and don't experience the natural rejection that happens where we're just not as good as others or we don't achieve where we want. And so women will have that fear of rejection because we didn't know how to manage it. Also, women have this other interesting dilemma, this desire for approval. How do I look? Am I okay? Do I look okay? Is my makeup on right? Do I look fat in this? I mean, those are all things that women tend to ask each other to get this approval. And we're really searching for this external form of approval rather than this an internal form of approval of, well, what do I think? What do I believe is right? And we give over ourselves over to what other people think. And if somebody has a thought that we're not, that they don't approve of us and actually say that they don't approve of us or approve of what we're doing or how we look, we really take that as a serious flaw in ourselves rather than, they think about it differently than I do, and kind of let it go. We tend to have that more of that fear, the rejection, but also the desire for approval. We kind of have those both going on at the same time. What we know is that there is a great cost to this people pleasing that women engage in. And when we try and take care of others at our expense, there are problems that show up, a cost to us. And let's see what kind of cost. Think about what the cost is to you. What is the cost for people pleasing and giving over yourself for somebody else's well being rather than your own? So the results that show up. What one result is stress, is that we feel stressed that we can't achieve what we want to, and so there's this sense of stress. Also, there is stress around, I can't meet that mark of pleasing them enough. There's always a point when we're people pleasing where it doesn't work, where they're not pleased, and then we fear rejection and then a lack of approval, and all those things happen, and then we feel even more stress. So that's one thing that happens. Another thing that happens is resentment. When we're giving over to somebody else, we have this internal feeling of resentment, of not being honored for all I do, all I give. I help you out all the time and I get nothing back. We have resentment. And so we're not really giving from a place of just giving to give. We're giving with the sense of, I should get something back, which is adoration, which is love, which is approval. And when we don't get that, which we won't, if we're in this mode of constant people pleasing, there's going to be a point where you're not going to get the feedback that you want or the positive affirmation that you want or think you deserve, which leads to those feelings of resentment. Another thing that shows up in people pleasing is burnout, where we're giving, 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 and there's nothing coming back at us. We're not fueling ourselves. We're not feeding our soul and giving back to ourselves. And we end up being burnt out and being kind of without energy. That depletion of energy happens, and that is really detrimental to women. And another area that we find with people pleasing is you don't feel fulfilled when you're giving, giving, giving. There's no sense of like, I'm doing this for myself. How am I having this kind of self-fulfillment? And that ends up being, once again, it's like depleting energy. It depletes your inner self, your inner feeling about yourself. And so the fulfillment level goes down too. And that means we're helping others and not helping ourselves. And that really leads to feeling tired and overwhelmed and burnt and stressed. So those are things, and I think we can agree that people pleasing isn't a good thing. And we're going to talk later about what we can do about it. So that's the first area that I think women fall into a lot, is people pleasing. And we're talking about how detrimental it is. The second area where this shows up for women is we experience what we call emotional dysregulation. And emotional dysregulation is the inability to effectively manage or control our emotions, leading to an intense emotional response. So our emotions are become bigger than what we want them to be, or what the kind of the situation would even call for, because we're literally not taking care of ourselves and we're giving way too much. what I found interesting is I was thinking about this talk for International Women's Day. I realized that over the course of history that women are often seen as emotional, and that is really comes with that meme of the out of control woman, the woman who is crying a lot and ask, why are you crying? The woman who is highly emotional, and then they'll be asked, are you on your period? That meaning that because we have emotions, we're on our period and there's some kind of hormonal problem. Or the other question would be, are you menopausal? Like, once again, are your emotions affected by your hormones? When really what we're dysregulated from not taking care of ourselves. And then we become associated with these really intense feelings that seem more out of control than the situation would kind of call for. We so we end up feeling a lot of lack of self-worth. We feel more stress. We feel resentment. We feel burnt out. Just like we talked about with the people pleasing, we end up really kind of coming off that we're the problem because we haven't been taking care of ourselves. So it's really becomes that looking on your or looking back at times when you felt emotionally dysregulated, where you felt the emotions were larger than the situation allowed, but also you couldn't feel like you could pull them back in, or you couldn't feel like you could do anything about them. That ends up being a problem because you're feeling out of control. And it doesn't have to be that way. So, we're going to talk in the end, once again, with accelerated action. What are some things you can do to kind of counteract that emotional dysregulation and actually work into not being so emotionally dysregulated and feeling more empowered and at peace inside of yourself? So we talked about people pleasing, we talked about emotional dysregulation. The third thing that we find for women is that we don't hold on to boundaries. We don't make a definition about where is the line that we don't want anybody to cross. That don't cross this line because that's not okay. And we tend to be very fuzzy with our boundaries. And boundaries, I think, is where we look at where with our body, around our body, and how our body is going to be treated, boundaries around our emotions, and what is it okay to say to me about my emotions, or to allow myself to have full expression of my emotions, boundaries around my energy, around what am I going to do with this energy, and kind of what do I give myself to. Also, boundaries around time. Where do I spend my time? Where do I say, no, I'm not going to do that? That's a really hard one for women. Boundaries around time is really difficult. And boundaries around how am I going to take care of myself? I find that a lot with women that I work with is not being able to set boundaries around how will I be treated? And how will I treat myself? Because if we're people pleasing, if we're emotionally dysregulated and not having boundaries, we're kind of feeling out of control inside of ourselves. And our behavior then expresses that too. And we're not saying no to the things that are a no and a yes to the things that are yes. And then we feel really upset and overwhelmed and overloaded. So, like I said, boundaries are about saying yes to what's a yes, saying no to what's a no, and then maybe is always a no until it's a yes. And this has to do with all of those areas around body, emotions, energy, time, and well being. It really is beginning to determine what's okay for me and what's not okay for me, where I say a heck yes and where do I say a heck no. When we look at boundaries, I think we have to ask the question is, why don't we set boundaries? Why am I not setting a boundary? And there are a lot of reasons, and women end up with that people pleasing part is that we don't want to say no. That people pleasing part doesn't want to say no. And so we don't. And we know that it's something we don't want to do. And we have this guilt that shows up for us. And if I say no, I'm going to feel guilty because I should have done that to take care of that other person. And that guilt drives us to say yes when it really is a no, when it's really something we don't want to do. Another thing that happens why we don't set boundaries is rejection. We are afraid that if I say no to them, if I don't do that thing, if I don't treat them in a certain way, they're going to reject me. And I don't want to be rejected. So it becomes I want other people to feel comfortable. Remember, we're back to that people pleasing. I want other people to be comfortable. So I don't set boundaries because I don't want them to reject me and push me away. I'd rather feel uncomfortable than be rejected. Breathe that one in deeply. That's difficult to kind of move through. And I think it's important for you to think about as you're listening to this, at what point do I do these things? What's my story? When do I have a fear of rejection and guilt around saying no? Another area that shows up with why we don't set boundaries is the fear of conflict. I hear this all the time. I felt this myself. If I say no, they're going to be mad at me and they're going to call me out. And oh, they're going to ask me, well, why are you saying no? Why don't you want to do this? And then I might have to tell the truth and say, I'm not doing this because I don't want to. I don't like the situation. I want to do something else. I'm not really feeling like I want to do this with you. There are lots of reasons, and conflict can make it really difficult for us to set a boundary because we don't want anybody to be upset at us. We don't want them to have feelings for them to be dysregulated. So I'll take it for the team and I'll just do it because I don't want any conflict. Lastly, there's another reason why we don't set boundaries, and it's a lot of times because we don't know what we want. I don't say no because I don't know what I want to say a yes to. So if somebody asks me, sure, I'll do it. Sure, I'll do it. I've found that a lot where in the past, I've said yes to a lot of things that I didn't really want to do. And I just said yes because, oh, well, I'll just do it. I really didn't discern what do I really want to do. I like being busy. I like doing a lot of things. So I'll say yes, yes, yes. And last year, 2024 was the year for me, my year of no. So it was the year where my word for the year was no. And I said a lot of no's. I'm not going to do this. No, I'm not going to do that. I really had to go inside and think about what do I really want? What do I really want to do? What is my end goal? And if I'm doing this thing, why? And so it became more of me becoming discerning about what I really want. And there were a lot more no's, and I think people noticed it because I just wasn't as available for other things because I started to reflect on what do I really want. And why we don't set boundaries is because we don't know what we want. We have to spend time in contemplation, in meditation, in journaling, in really asking that question, what do I really want? And that's a deep question that requires some thoughtfulness for ourselves, right? Some thoughtfulness about what do we really want? What do I really want? There's a large cost. Guys, there's a large cost to not setting boundaries, a large cost. And I find this for myself and I find this for others is that one of the costs for not setting boundaries is that we can get blamed for whatever the conflict is. Because if we're not setting boundaries, we're not saying no when we're not really wanting to do it, and then we get emotionally dysregulated, right? So we people please, people please, people please. Then we become emotionally dysregulated, become upset. Then there's a conflict because we're upset. And then somebody else gets mad at us because of the conflict. When really that conflict would have not gone forward if we had said no in the beginning or had more a discernment about what parts are a yes and what parts are a no. So not setting boundaries really has the cost of us getting blamed for conflict. Another cost that comes with not setting boundaries is we're not allowing ourselves the opportunity to self-soothe. Remember when we talked about self dysregulation, emotional dysregulation, about being really upset? Well, we're not calming ourselves down. When we say no to the things that are a no, we then can go, oh, okay, I'm taking care of myself. I can soothe myself because we give ourselves the space to do it. So, a cost of not setting boundaries is we're not able to self-soothe. And then that emotional dysregulation gets heightened. We also end up feeling more stress. More stress and overwhelm once again leads to more self emotional dysregulation. Also, not setting boundaries leads to large amount of resentment. And we talked about that earlier, that you're resentful that you're doing something you don't feel like you really want to do, or as you're doing it, you start going, dang, why did I do this? I actually just have that happening for myself right now. I said yes to something that I should have been more thoughtful about. Is it really a yes? And as I moved into it and started doing it, all these things started to go wrong, more difficulty than it was more difficult than it needed to be. And I thought, darn, if I had have been more discerning, I would have said no. If I would have been not in my people pleasing mode, I probably would have said no to it. And so I've been journaling about that actually today, about my need to, in this certain situation, I need to be more mindful and maybe do a little bit more research to decide if I really want to do it and whether it's a yes, because I'm feeling right now this increase in resentment because I didn't set a boundary that now I'm seeing, dang, I really need to set that boundary. And lastly, the cost of not setting boundaries is just like it was with people pleasing and just like it was with emotional dysregulation is burnout, where it goes on and on and on. And then we feel burnt out. Our energy becomes low. We're not able to do the things we want to do. It takes more to get up in the morning and get things done. And we have more of a negative outlook. And that's about burnout. So not setting boundaries can really lead to burnout. I hope you're getting that with the people pleasing, emotional dysregulation, and boundaries, that it's really critical that we start thinking about it. And I hope as we're talking about this, once again, thinking about where that affects you, because these are fixable. There are things to do. And that's actually what we're going to get into right now, because when we take care of ourselves properly, we're increasing our empowerment. I love that empowered feeling, and increasing inner peace. Those are the two things I thought of for the takeaway from these ideas of people pleasing, emotional dysregulation, and boundaries is how can we move through those and come to a place of empowerment and a place of inner peace. And I think we can all agree that those are good goals that we all can move into. And they're absolutely goals that I want for myself. I want to feel more empowered. I want to feel more inner peace. And so, how can we start getting there? So, when we're talking about people pleasing, what could we do? It always starts with recognizing it. Recognize that you're people pleasing and ask yourself some questions. These are some really important questions that can be really helpful. Am I doing this to make them like me? Will I feel good if I do this? Why am I doing this? There are plenty of more questions you can ask. I like those three. Am I doing this to make them like me? Will I feel good if I do this? Why am I doing this? And then allow yourself to sit with the answers of what that means for you, to start wondering, am I people pleasing? That can be a question. Am I people pleasing? And what does that mean for me? And is that okay for me? I think also taking time for the mindset shift, to move out of the thoughts of pleasing others into the thought of, isn't this a good question? What is in my best interest? What is in my best interest? Also, having some positive affirmations. I'm worthy. I'm strong enough to walk through this. And really knowing and filling yourself up with this positive sense of, I don't need to take care of everybody else. The more I take care of myself, the better I am for everybody else. I come to the table differently. And that's valuable. That's empowering, right? Another thing you can do around people pleasing is surround yourself with people who are having that kind of give and take attitude. People who are um they give to you and then they allow you to give to them. You give to them and you allow them to give to you. Where this reciprocal relationship where it feels like you're both in a win-win situation. Really, that's what we want. People pleasing is a win-lose situation. What we're looking for empowerment is a win-win situation. So, those are some really important ways to start moving away from people pleasing. The second area is emotional dysregulation. And what can we do with that? Right? We talked about some great things for people pleasing. What can we do about emotional dysregulation? Because sometimes that feels too hard to manage. Sometimes it feels too hard to manage. The starting spot is just like with people pleasing. Notice when you feel dysregulated. Notice what's going on. Notice when you feel that really upset feeling, that anxious feeling, that overwhelmed feeling, and start noticing it. Because I think of it on a 1 to 10 scale, right? One, I'm not dysregulated. One, I'm not dysregulated at all, or zero, I'm not dysregulated at all. 10, I'm extremely dysregulated. And where are you at? I like to look at it on 1 to 10 or 0 to 10, and then five is in the middle. Am I in the middle? Am I leaning towards dysregulation or not? And if you're at an 8, 9, 10, feeling emotionally dysregulated, danger. That's the time to really start looking at it and find ways to bring it down, find ways to be less emotionally dysregulated and more regulated, which is empowering. It's an empowering kind of feeling. Some of the ways to handle that once you've noticed you're feeling dysregulated, count it on a 1 to 10 scale and see how dysregulated you feel. Some things to do are to practice mindfulness. This is a great way to start physically calming the body down. Because when we're emotionally dysregulated, we're physically dysregulated too. There's your body might have your heart might be beating quickly. You might have clenched fists. Your jaw might be tight. You're scrunching your face. Your tummy feels upset. All kinds of things can happen in your body. So one of the things to do is to start regulating your body. One of the best ways to do that is to take a deep breath. Breathe in and breathe out. Breathe in and breathe out. Breathe in and breathe out. In my programs, we talk about this a lot about how to really regulate your emotions. Deep breathing, simple, easy. You can do it anytime and it costs no money. It's just remembering. One of the things you can do is just put it on your phone. I've had clients who put a timer on their phone to do a couple of deep breaths where a gong goes off at the hour, and then the gong goes off, and then they take a deep breath. And it's a great way to remind yourself to be calm in your body. Another thing to do to become regulated in your emotions is to start journaling. It's one of my favorite ways. I like doing conscious journaling, and I'll actually put a link in the notes for conscious journaling for you to practice that. I have a whole blog on that because it's so helpful. The conscious journaling, where you get everything out on the paper, you get everything in your head out on the paper, it literally frees up your body from all of the stress and all the thoughts and all the negativities that's going on, to put it to the paper and literally get it out of your body. Another thing to do in the area of mindfulness around emotional dysregulation is positive affirmations. It switches the brain into thinking about what's positive. We can always go to the negative. We default to the negative. We always default to the negative, and we think that is true. If it's what I think, it's going to be negative, and that's the truth. But we also can veer in the side of the positive. It takes more effort. Takes more time. It takes more consciousness. And as we start deferring to what I know to be positive, I am strong. I am well. I am confident. You then start attracting that to you and you start filling yourself up with that idea of I'm confident, I'm kind, I'm strong, I am willing. And those things start helping your emotions to regulate again. Another thing you can do that in part of mindfulness that I really love is taking a walk, getting your feet on the ground, getting out of the sitting and the thinking and just taking a walk. I like doing it where I'll put one foot down and I'll say to myself, one, two, one, two, with each foot that I put down, because it takes me out of thinking about over managing my brain and getting into the physical walking. I do that. I also say the statement, I walk with sure and steady feet, because when I'm focused on my feet walking consciously, I'm not all, what I find is when I'm emotionally dysregulated, I'm not thinking about walking and, you kind of trip and everything. So when I walk with firm feet, I walk with firm feet. And that helps me get out of this emotional feeling and into just feeling connected with my body, just feeling connected with my body. The last area we talked about was boundaries and how do we set and maintain boundaries, because I know personally setting and maintaining boundaries leads to a feeling of empowerment and it leads to a feeling of inner peace. It just does. How do we do that? Here we go back to the start. What we've said in each of the areas is notice when you're not setting boundaries. Notice when you are setting boundaries. Notice what it looks like, what it feels like. Who can I set boundaries on and who don't I? Just start examining that, examining what that is. And then start wondering, why is it hard to set boundaries? Who is it hard to set boundaries on? What is it about that I have a hard time doing that with? And then it becomes you become having a plan of like, oh, with this person I have a hard time setting boundaries. And then you can start wondering, how could I set boundaries? How could I say no? And then that leads us into the area of practicing clear and assertive communication. How can I say no to them? What can I say? How can I get my point across? I like talking about clear and simple statements. Like I do a clear and simple statement to the person, and I'll repeat it, and I'll say my boundary, and I'll say it one sentence, very clear, simple. And if they keep pushing back, I'll say, I don't have a better way of saying this to you, but I hope you understand and take what I'm saying, and let's move on. This is something that I work with in therapy with people. So if this is really hard for you, this is the time that I highly suggest therapy, because in therapy, we really talk a lot about communication skills. We talk about the people pleasing, the boundaries, the emotional dysregulation, but this assertive communication skills and practicing it and finding a way to say it that will not have a negative reaction from somebody, where you own your part and you allow them to own their part, is super important. Super important. That's where therapy can be really helpful. Therapy is also very helpful if how to handle the pushback, because there's often pushback from people. Like I said, they'll push back and push back, and why are you doing that? What are you doing? Why are you doing this? Why are you changing? Why are you saying no? And that comes especially when you've never said no before and they're confused. Like, I don't understand. Wait, you've never done this before. And so having a clear plan about how do I say no? How do I say what I want? And then how do I back off of having any kind of argument? Because when we set a boundary, it's not about arguing. It's about being clear and concise, and that's it. And there's no wiggle room. And so having that confidence to say it, and then knowing how to say, I've said it the best way I can. I don't have a better way to tell you. I hope you can understand, and we can move on. That's it. And then you stop talking about it. Those are really helpful, you guys. Those are things that I talk about a lot in therapy with clients. I practice it myself. It's some of those are golden nuggets, golden nuggets. And then when you start doing this, have consistency and follow through. If you say what you're going to do, do it. If you say you're not going to do something, don't do it. What'll happen is if you set a boundary and then you go back on your boundary because you're trying to people please, you end up sending a very mixed message that you then get upset about. The other person gets upset about. It becomes inconsistent. And so you want to have follow through. So if you're going to say no and say you're not going to do something, don't do it. Don't do it. And that's where you gather together people that are on your side who also set boundaries that you can have conversations with them about. I just said no to this person. Back me up that I did the right thing, or help me manage my anxiety around telling them no. So you have your social structure, your people around you that are able to help you with this, right? I want you to consider, where do you need to say yes and where do you need to say no? Have you done it in the way that works for you? On International Women's Day, this whole month of thinking about women and how we want to be in this world, feeling empowered and feeling that inner peace. What's your accelerated action? What can you do? We gave a lot of ideas today. Where, in terms of people pleasing, emotional dysregulation, boundaries, where can you have your action? I love that that is a focus on International Women's Day, is where can we have action? It's one thing to think about it, it's another thing to do it. And make it something that you really can stand by, that you really can do, that you can have follow through, because then you're going to feel good about yourself and you're going to feel more confident. When you feel more confident, you feel more competent, and then you can do it again. I know you've got this. We've gone through a whole model about how you can literally come to the table differently. And I really hope you follow through on some of them. I would love to hear what you're doing. I would love to have you make a comment on what you've done in the in the comment section. Please comment and let me know what you're doing. I love us. I call it Red Rover technique, where we stand arm in arm together and help each other out and help encourage each other, empower each other to live these wonderful lives that we all want to live. I know you can do it. You got this. I look forward to talking to you next time. Bye, everyone.